Well, let's go to our panel now. In Raleigh, North Carolina is Peter Eltsov. He's a professor of international affairs at National Defense University. In Budapest is George Szamuely. He's a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute. And in Corvallis, Oregon is defense expert Michael Peck. He's a contributing writer for the foreign policy publication, The National Interest. Gentlemen, good to have you all on the program. Peter Eltsov, let me start with you. Does Poland need these 1,000 more U.S. troops right now?
Yes, they do, but it's more of a symbolic gesture, I think. They have a pathological historical fear of Russia, and it's understandable given the history of relations between Russia and Poland, given the history of abuse and military conquest, and particularly with recent diplomatic successes of Russia in Europe, like, for example, just 2 days ago, it returned after 5 years to the Parliamentary Assembly of European, of the Council of Europe. They do need this protection. I would emphasize it's more symbolic than real, but it's an important gesture.
Yeah, and just some housekeeping here, just to let you all know that we had Dominik Tarczynski, who's a Polish member of parliament and a member of the ruling party. He was lined up for this debate. He pulled out a couple of hours ago, unfortunately. He had other things to do, but it's unfortunate that we can't get his view. George Szamuely, do you agree with Peter that this is more symbolic rather than the actual tangible, practical numbers at play?
Well, it may be symbolic, but it's a very bad symbol because it adds tension to an already fraught relationship between Russia and the West. What the United States, Poland, and NATO should be now doing is try to ease tension and rehashing ancient grievances that the Poland may have against Russia really doesn't serve any useful purpose. And to say that this is a symbolic, like it's only 1,000 troops, well, how would the United States respond if the Russians dispatched 1,000 troops to Canada or to Mexico or to anywhere in Central America? The United States would regard that as a really outrageous, insulting, threatening behavior. So, let's try and put ourselves into Russia's shoes and see how they respond to an unnecessarily provocative act.
Michael Peck, in order for us to try and understand how the Russians are responding, I guess we could look at Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, who was quoted in Russian media as saying this reflected aggressive intentions on the part of the Trump administration by putting those soldiers in Poland. Why is Trump doing this now?
Well, I think there's a variety of reasons. One is I think he's feeling under pressure regarding a somewhat problematic relationship with Russia in terms of his own personal relationships. I also think that there's other factors at work over here. He wants to be perceived as being a strong leader. I agree, though, that this is largely a symbolic gesture. It doesn't really change the strategic situation in Europe.
Right. Peter Eltsov, for a president who isn't completely sold on the very idea of NATO, here he is doing very Cold War-y things with 1,000 soldiers in Poland, commemorating 20 years of NATO membership for the Poles and so on. Is this really about antagonizing the Russians, or is it maybe something completely different? Is he trying to maybe tell Germany, because he's taken 1,000 from the German contingent, hey, Germany, I'm going to reduce my troop contingent there, I'm trimming there, and I'm going to send them to Poland. Can we be absolutely sure of what Trump's intentions are?
Well, first of all, I would like to emphasize that it's done very much under pressure from Poland itself. Another comment to my colleague from Budapest, I don't think that there is such thing as the West, as the United West any longer. And the situation is very different from the Cold War. And Europe is split. There are many countries which sympathize with Russia. So the United States and NATO and those remaining countries which are hostile towards Russia need to take this into account. So I wouldn't take it in the context of either NATO or the United West, as it doesn't exist anymore, or even the United Europe, that it arguably doesn't exist anymore, as we just saw in the European Parliamentary Assembly. So, like, I would take it more on a bilateral relations between the United States and Poland, and maybe countries like, say, Baltic states or Northern Europe. So it's a totally different situation than the situation in the Cold War. And Russia had very many diplomatic and other successes in Europe. Like, for example, in Bulgaria, the president is very pro-Russian. The relations with Turkey, between Russia and Turkey, are pretty good today. So it's a very different situation.
Do you think, just to address the Germany issue, do you think that this could be a message to the Germans?
It could be, definitely. It could be a message to the Germans, but I wouldn't overemphasize that. I think, yes, from the United States, it is a message to the Germans saying that Germans are becoming more and more pro-Russian.
I see.
Just recently, the former Chancellor Schroeder openly said that all the sanctions need to be removed, and several senior politicians joined him. Germany pretty much is sick of sanctions, and I don't think we'll want to continue with them anymore.
George, doesn't Peter make a good point that we have to go to the genesis of that and of this, and that's the Poles saying, we want the troops. We want the F-35s. We want the stronger relationship with the United States. It wasn't America making the offer.
Poland does not call the shots when it comes to US foreign policy. If the US does not want to do something, it will not do it. If Poland wanted to do something that the United States disapproved of, the United States would make its feelings clear very, very quickly, just as it made its feelings very clear to the Germans over Nord Stream 2 and to the other members of the JCPOA over Iran. The United States makes its feelings very clear. So therefore, Poland is not the one that's calling the shots. It is the US Cold War hawks who have decided upon this venture, just like it's the US Cold War hawks who want to get the US ever more closely involved in the war in Ukraine. And this is all leading to an unnecessary tension within Europe, which is very much favored by the Cold War hawks, who, fortunately, or rather unfortunately for the rest of us, have a ready, willing, and able ally in Poland and in the 3 Baltic states.
Michael Peck, is that accurate, that this is just an expression of the policy desires of the people that George calls the US Cold War hawks?
I would say it's a continuation of policies that go back all through the Cold War. Russian aggression has been an issue for the US and the West for decades. What's changed is that the expansion of NATO and the proximity of NATO troops now, American troops in particular, to the Russian border. But this isn't a new issue. Containment, keeping Russia at bay is not new.
Right. Peter Eltsov. So the Americans play their card. And I guess, to your point earlier on, Poland wanted more American troops, and they agreed on 1,000. I know Poland wanted much more, according to earlier reports. So now the Russians look at it. East of Poland, perhaps in Belarus, is the natural consequence of this that the Russians go and boost their presence there, because Lukashenko, even though he kind of plays both sides, he's still an ally of the Russians. Do they go and boost up Belarus on the other side of the border?
Yes, most likely. But I would like to return for a second to Poland. I would like, to me, it seems a little bit derogatory towards Poland to downplay their role. I mean, but not everything is decided in Washington. And Poland, as you just mentioned, they would love much more. And we still don't know whether Fort Trump, so-called Fort Trump, will be built. There are some hotheads in Poland who would like to see nuclear weapons there. So what the United States have done is actually very little compared to what Poland would like to see to be done there. And yes, Russia probably will respond, but I would not overplay, again, the significance of their response. There are already troops and nuclear heads in Kaliningrad, very close to Poland. So the geopolitical situation will pretty much remain the same. But again, I would like to say that the decision, to my knowledge, the pressure from Poland was very strong for years and years. And it's not just that Washington, just out of a blue or whatever, because of the hawks in Washington, they decided to do this.
Okay, so round two of the same question to you, George, or a variation of it, which is, are you underestimating the desire of the Poles to have Washington's presence? As was mentioned by Peter, they want Fort Trump. They want a permanent US presence. There was a memorandum of understanding or memorandum on cooperation with the Americans regarding a nuclear power plant as well. Some within Poland want that to be, a place where they actually have nuclear weapons as well. So with all of that in mind, are you maybe belittling this idea that the Poles want this? They want Washington to be their big ally and to beef them up against the Russians.
No, I'm not belittling it at all. I'm quite sure that Poland does want this. What I am belittling is the idea that Poland has any say over Washington policymakers. Poland can want anything it desires, but if Washington says no, then Washington says no. In this case, what Poland wanted was something that Washington was more than happy to deliver. Now, you're right about the nuclear weapons, but fortunately, the issue of nuclear weapons is prohibited by the NATO Russia founding document, which actually says no nuclear weapons in any new NATO member states. So that's off the table, even though these Polish crazies would like to see it there. But the thing is that when one asks the question that you asked, well, don't you think that the Russians will respond by beefing up their presence in Belarus or in Kaliningrad? The people who are advocating this increase of U.S. presence immediately belittle it. Oh, no, don't worry about anything. That's nothing to worry about. Well, if that's not anything to worry about, then why are we talking about this great Russian threat? In other words, you kind of make up this whole notion that there's a huge Russian threat facing Europe, the world, or whatever. And when one says, well, if they're really that threatening, maybe they'll just do something. Maybe they'll increase their presence in Belarus. Immediately that's dismissed. No, don't worry about anything.
Peter?
So there's a little bit of hypocrisy involved here.
Peter, respond to that.
Well, I don't think actually there is a great Russian threat in a sense like of a conventional war. Clearly, Putin is not, he is not an idiot. He's not planning to go and conquer Poland again or roll with tanks to like Paris. So the threat is more as in a form of a hybrid warfare and maybe with some Baltic states. So I would say it's more of a kind of a game and a containment game on both sides. So as I said in the beginning, more of a symbolic thing. For Poland, it's because genetically they have such a fear of Russia, so they want to kind of secure this situation. So I do see it on both sides,
Right.
more of a symbolic gesture once again.
Michael Peck, very finally, is Poland still precariously balanced between the West and Russia?
Due to its geography, yes, that's its unfortunate position. But nonetheless, it is a NATO member, and therefore the credibility of the alliance and its right to station troops there is not in question. I think the Poles do have to walk a fine line between being strong enough to create a deterrence to any potential Russian action versus actually being provocative and provoking the Russian action. It is a fine balance.
Okay, gentlemen, good to talk to all of you. Michael Peck, George Szamuely, and Peter Eltsov. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.